Hi, everyone. Good morning to our colleagues in the US and good afternoon to our colleagues in Beirut, and welcome. We're so pleased you could all be here, and a special thanks to Elias Al-Haddad and his colleagues from USAID for joining us. Just a quick note before we get started that we will be recording this presentation. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Caitlin Riley, and I'm a Senior Program Officer at Counterpart International's headquarters. I've supported the BALADI CAP project in Lebanon in collaboration with MSI, the lead implementer on the ground, since 2019. We're so happy to have MSI colleagues join us this morning, especially the former BALADI CAP Chief of Party, Nada. Today, we're here to present products from Counterpart's learning activity in Lebanon, which looked at civil society advocacy in the country via 5 case studies. Counterpart partnered with the Beyond Group, a local Lebanese firm, in this effort. A special thanks to Francis Abu Zaid and Diana Al-Baba, our eyes and ears on the ground, who worked hand in hand with Beyond Group to see this research through to completion, as well as the final products. We're also very grateful to USAID and Elias for supporting Counterpart to conduct this learning activity, and note that BALADI CAP conducted the study of these advocacy efforts in Lebanon, but not the campaigns themselves. We look forward to sharing the findings and having a productive conversation afterwards. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Marwa Abudaya from Beyond Group. Marwa, over to you.
I'll be presenting today our findings based on the study of the 5 case studies, mainly looking at success factors, challenges, and lessons learned deduced from the 5 cases. So feel free to interrupt me as we go, and then as well at the end we'll have a Q&A and discussion time. I'll try to be as brief as possible so I don't be talking all the time, so let's see how this goes. I'll turn off my camera so the connection can hold, and I'll start sharing. So our study focused on advocacy efforts in Lebanon between 2013 and 2018. So we took that time frame, and what we looked at is a diverse thematic campaigns throughout the country and taking place at both the national and the local level. So basically the focus of the study was to map these efforts that took place between 2013 and 2018. So we mapped as many campaigns as we could get track of, and then we set a set of criteria based on which we chose 5 campaigns to focus on and delve into and develop case studies around. And then the last phase of the methodology or of the study was to identify recommendations and lessons learned, and to see together how we can benefit from these cases in future advocacy planning, programming, and training. So in the mapping phase, we looked both at offline and online initiatives. So we basically talked to people, NGOs, INGOs, donor agencies. We've reached out to them to see if they're supporting any campaigns, what were these campaigns, and what was the focus of them. And then we looked online, whether through newspaper articles that covered campaigns or Facebook pages. So we tried to track all Facebook campaigns because some of the campaigns took place online and did not have an offline component to them. So we tracked these as well. And we came up with, we reached a list of 30 Sorry, but there's background noise. Is it from my side? Okay, so we came to a list of 30 campaigns, and then from these 30 campaigns, based on the following themes, we tried to deduce 5 that we thought would be would give us enough input and information to deduce lessons learned, success stories, and like successes and common challenges. So we looked at geographic focus, keeping in mind that some of the campaigns in the country are taking place at the national level, which means different activists or groups or NGOs from different areas or regions in the country are working together on a same issue. Or they're taking place at the local level, whereby within a certain municipality or a certain governorate, activists or NGOs or campaigns are formed to change at the local level or the hyper-local level. We took a thematic focus And in the thematic focus, we went back to the mapped list. And from the mapped list, we found out that there are commonalities in terms of themes between the different campaigns. So many campaigns focused around environmental issues or environmental preservation issues. Some other good number of campaigns focused on social and economic issues, others focused on human rights, specifically women's rights issues, and then there was a theme that focused around public spaces and access to green public spaces. So these were two criteria we looked at, and the third one was the objective. While we all know that advocacy primarily focuses on policy change or forming new laws or all law changes, in Lebanon specifically, as many of the initiatives or events are relatively nascent on certain aspects or certain topics, we also took behavioral change as one objective that advocacy also aims to achieve. And this was, and we basically started from the premise that the first level of advocacy is basically awareness raising on a certain issue. And then we said that if there were certain campaigns that aimed at behavioral changes, so waste management or sorting from source, for example, as part of an advocacy campaign. So we'll look also into these to see if there were any differences in how campaigners lived the process, whether they were aiming to change a policy or aiming to change a behavior, or did they share some of the common challenges and lessons learned. And the last criteria we looked at was political sensitivity, especially in a country like Lebanon, where we have a highly confessional sectarian political system. Certain issues might be politically sensitive or might be faced with political deadlocks. And specifically things like electoral laws, nationality laws, decentralization laws, and so forth. And we thought that maybe we can take one issue that is highly political in the country to also be able to see whether working on political issues is harder or more complex than working on environmental issues or local level issues in that sense. And based on that, we chose 5 case studies, and the 5 case studies, I think you all received them. One case study focused on access to public spaces, and we'll see how under that we looked at 4 different campaigns that tackled public spaces. Yes.
It jumped back to your previous slide.
Okay. So we looked at the public spaces issue, and we looked at a political issue which we chose was the women's rights to give their nationality to their children. We took one local campaign that is a movement is life, which took place in North Lebanon in Tripoli, and we looked at the waste management coalition, and finally a long-lasting cause that we also chose that's both political and human rights focused was that of the families of the disappeared, which is the longest advocacy campaign among the ones that we tackled. So what I'll do now is that I'll present a summary of each of the cases, and then after that we'll go into the challenges, successes, and lessons learned for them. Common lessons learned, challenges, and successes. So please do stop me. I can't see who's raising hands, so I'll rely on you, Caitlin, for that, in case there were any questions or comments as we go. So the first the first case study focused, as I mentioned, on the public spaces, and this is where we looked at the Hajj Beirut campaign. This is where we looked at protecting Daily and Ramlet al-Baida as public beaches. We looked at Adloun Coast in the south, and we looked at Kfar Abida in the north. And we tried to see to what extent there was commonalities between the challenges and the lessons learned that these 4 campaigns faced as they worked on public spaces and preservation of public spaces, and to what extent were they able to collaborate and work together. So as we know, the Beirut Public Park, or Hajj Beirut, has been closed for 20 years, right after the civil war, for several different reasons. And several initiatives were being put in place to at least bring it back as a space for people to meet and get together. And Nahnu in 2010 started their campaign, and it was a support of USAID back then under OTI program, to relaunch the campaign or launch a campaign around the reopening of Hajj Beirut. And they worked extensively on a very detailed research file to build their file and arguments as to why Hajj Beirut should be open. And this is where we worked together with them back then in terms of building their capacity, their outreach, and so forth. And they managed to actually get successful in opening Hajj Beirut, and it opened its doors in 2016 back to the public. Just a little bit of a background, it was fully closed for Lebanese, but people with a European or an American nationality, unfortunately, for the Lebanese people, were allowed in. And this created a little, a hidden tension as to why foreigners are allowed to go into Hajj Beirut, but not us locals, and not us, the neighbors of Hajj Beirut, and so forth. So all these arguments were put into the file that Nahnu discussed, and they managed to open the park. Now the campaign continues slowly but surely. The park has been closed, unfortunately, for the past year under the alibi that there's COVID. But then while the country opens, and the country has officially fully opened last Monday on March 22nd, Hajj Beirut continues to be closed under again the same alibi that there's COVID and we don't want to risk it. So Nahnu and the volunteers under the campaign continue working on that. At the same time, they've expanded to reach out and campaign to regain public spaces across the country. So they have campaigns in the Bekaa and in the south to regain public spaces. Delhi and Ramlet al-Baida are two public beaches that were closed, and then construction work has started to take place near or almost on both areas. So there was a whole campaign towards the preservation and announcing them as natural reserves. And this is where the Lebanese Coast Coalition was formed, and it brought together the campaigns and activists working on Delhi and Ramlet al-Baida, and those working on Adboun Coast, and those working on Kfar Abida. The commonality between the three is on the three coastal sites, there were plans for either resorts or hotels to be built, and activists came together to basically not necessarily just stop the building and construction of commercial businesses, but to at least protect the access and the right to the Lebanese citizens to access these coasts and beaches, irrespective of whichever project will take place. And what was interesting is that activists pointed out on how the construction of these sites is impacting or will impact the biodiversity and have environmental impact on the surrounding. So the three of them have succeeded to stop at least some expansion of the construction work, but at the same time, and which is more important, is that they succeeded to modify the contracts to at least take into consideration some environmental measures to be put in place to avoid having negative environmental impact on the region. The second case that I'll discuss is Al-Haraki Baraki, or Movement is Life, which is a hyper-local campaign that took place in Tripoli. It was formed and led by people injured and disabled as a result of the neighborhood conflicts in Tripoli between Tabene and Jabal Mahsen. These people came together after the peace process, or the peace was agreed upon in Tripoli. So they came together to form a little coalition that worked on reactivating or activating an article in Law 220, which is the law that protects the rights of disabled people in Lebanon. There was an article that says, or there is an article in the law that says that 3% quota of jobs in the private and public institutions should go to people with disabilities. So with the support of UNDP and local consultants, these people managed to to form their little campaign, and they advocated with the municipality and the private sector in the region to ensure that they can secure jobs to members of the coalition and other members of the community who got disabled. So they mapped around 120 individuals who got disabilities due to the war or the ongoing violent conflicts, and they managed to secure jobs for these people based on this article in the law. They continued, right, like during our study, they were continuing to advocate with the Ministry of Social Affairs and the Ministry of Labor to push for the enforcement of this law. Unfortunately, and because we've been in a complete political deadlock for the past year, the campaign at the moment is not carrying any action, but at least their plan is to continue to pressure for that law implementation. The third case study is that around waste management. So we focused on the Waste Management Coalition. For those who know, in 2015, we witnessed a major, massive waste management crisis in the country. Probably you've seen the river of garbage on CNN. We're now all known for that. So groups of activists came together and formed the Waste Management Coalition. And the aim of that coalition was to find structured, well-studied environmental waste management solutions to the crisis that we were living in the country. So it brought together activists, experts, and non-governmental organizations, in addition to community members who wanted to participate to address the mismanagement of the crisis. Although the crisis was nationwide, they focused their efforts, in the last bit of their efforts, they were focused on Beirut, especially because the municipality of Beirut during the campaign was discussing the option of buying incinerators and placing them in the city as a way to solve the crisis. So instead of having the garbage on the streets, we take them to incinerators, we burn them, and then we inhale them. So the coalition has worked to pressure the municipality of Beirut to hold on that decision, and they managed to do so in 2018. So the municipality stopped that discussion and postponed it. At the same time, they were working on reformulating the waste management law in Lebanon. Although the government or the Council of Ministers have passed a law, but it did not cover all the aspirations of the coalition. So they continue to pressure the government and the parliament to take into account their recommendations for a sustainable waste management solution that is reflected both in the law, what the law says, and in the practice. The fourth case study is My Nationality is a Right for Me and My Family. So جنسيتي حقي ولأسرتي. Also a long-lasting campaign. Over 20 years ago, a group of NGOs focused on women's rights have started the campaign to push the Lebanese parliament to approve a law that grants women the right to give their nationality to their children. Unfortunately, it's a highly political issue, specifically as again, as I mentioned, within the sectarian system, passing such a law was countered by arguments such as we have a high number of Palestinian refugees in the country and a high number of Lebanese women married to Palestinian refugees. And if we are going to grant this right to women, this means we are indirectly allowing the nationalization of Palestinians, which will in turn means that we will have higher number of Sunni Muslims rather than Christians and so forth. And this is the kind of arguments that happen at the Lebanese parliament level within the political blocs to actually delay advocacy campaigns or stop advocacy or policy changes in that sense. The campaign continues to date. They have managed to draft a law and they have managed to put it on the legislative agenda. It has been under discussion for quite some time. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, that it goes back to being politically stopped either by political blocs or because of also religious interference. So it's a long-lasting struggle, and hopefully Lebanese women will get to actually get that right sometime. It's important to note that this campaign is part of a regional campaign as well, which gives it more strength because there are lessons learned to build on from the region in terms of outreach, in terms of engaging media, addressing political groups, and so forth. So the campaign continues to date. It's a nationwide issue at the moment, and everyone in the country knows about this issue. So it's a matter of really finding the right political moment with the right political blocks to actually pass the law. The last case study is also covers a long-lasting campaign, that of the Committee of the Families of the Kidnapped and Disappeared. So the Committee of the Kidnapped and Disappeared was formed at the beginning of the Lebanese Civil War. So in 1982, the Civil War started in 1975. In 1982, families of people who were kidnapped as the events of the war started taking place came together, and they started demanding the release of their children or husbands or family members. And then bit by bit, they grew and they came together and they organized under the Committee of the Families of the Disappeared. And they have since then been working on the issue, making it a national issue as opposed to an issue of families who were directly impacted by the war. And since then, they've managed to work closely with parliamentarians, with political blocs, with ministries, with the media. They've literally exhausted all resources to be able to put their issue on a national agenda. And in 2018, law number 105 was passed, and this led to the formation of a national independent and impartial commission to investigate on the cases of those who were forcibly disappeared. And those who were forcibly disappeared are either due to Israeli abduction or Israeli kidnapping or Syrian kidnapping. So they're targeting both fronts in that sense. And this has came after rounds and rounds of the Lebanese government forming national commissions that end up not independent and not impartial, but politically biased, and therefore don't necessarily lead to any concrete action. So it's been almost 40 years since the campaign has started. And just 2 years after the passage of the law, the government has appointed 10 members of the National Commission, including members of the Committee of the Families of the Kidnapped and the Disappeared. So hopefully these efforts are finally coming into a culmination in a sense of an official committee that can actually carry the work forward in terms of archiving the whole process and the stories, but at the same time, and more importantly, is to really get information as to the whereabouts of these individuals. So these are the five studies or 5 case studies and campaigns that we analyzed. We have pointed down commonalities that they shared in terms of how they reached success, the common challenges that they faced, and lessons learned. So in terms of success factors, 3 success factors or 3 key ingredients for success were presented by all or across all campaigns. First of all is building trust, and building trust is at all levels. So it's building trust with citizens who have lost trust in change in the country. So there was a huge effort that was being put from across all campaigns in terms of regaining this trust from the citizens that the civil society organizations can actually impact policy change and can have a say in that. And there was trust between the campaigners and the media in the sense that the media is a key ally to help bring these issues to the table and to national agendas. So trust was restored in a sense, and the media was a great ally for them. A second success factor was building partnerships, and building partnerships at all levels. So between the campaign leads and other civil society organizations and actors allowed these coalitions to grow and push forward their agenda and make their voices stronger and widely heard. sharing resources, both technical and financial. So for example, NAHNO received funding to manage the campaign, but it also relied on experts or legal experts from the Lebanese university to provide some legal support or documentation of the Beirut Public Park and its surrounding and etc. In addition to building partnerships with donor agencies, INGOs, and the private sector, allowed these campaigns to diversify their sources of funding and also their network in terms of knowledge and expansion. The third success factor was raising awareness and persuasion. So as I started, the first building block of advocacy is raising awareness on an issue. So making an issue widely spread and known in the country was a key ingredient to basically gaining support of community members and gaining support of the media, donor agencies, and so forth. So it was very important for all campaigns to let people know of what's happening and the impact of what's happening on their lives directly, whether they were directly impacted by the issue or not. Then the success in terms of bringing these issues to the table and then having the conversations directly with decision makers, be it at the local level with mayors or municipal members, or at the national level with parliamentarians and ministers. And then it was a common understanding among all that success is more sensed or easier to achieve at the local level as opposed to a national level, in the sense that at the local level, because the proximity, there's a small proximity between citizens and the decision makers. So it's easier for me to go and lobby at the municipal level rather than going to the parliament. And at a smaller scale, people know each other. They know the ins and outs of things in a more easier manner. So that also showed how the pace of how much movement is life in Tripoli has achieved their relatively success as opposed to others at the national level. In terms of challenges, definitely the complexity of the policy-making system in Lebanon comes as one of the common challenges. Now, one would argue that the policy-making system is not really complex. It's straightforward. If you want to change a law, you would go do 1, 2, 3. This is straightforward. At the same time, once you go do 1, 2, 3, you'll get shut down by the sectarian, the partisan, and the fragmented nature of the socio-political power within the system, which makes it complex at the level of, okay, what do we do now? Who do we go to? How to get information, where to access it, and so forth. And this is where political dynamics come in play between the different political groups and political parties. So they would pass a law, but not pass the other, because the other political bloc had previously complicated the process for them on another issue, and so forth. And then it was important to link national issues to local issues. It was important to all campaigns we talked to make their issue heard at the local level as well. So instead of, for example, the campaign of the Nationality is my right, instead of them only talking to the parliament, they made sure that they reached the masses, had a grassroots campaign across the country, engaging different women and different families from the different regions to raise their voices and make it as a national issue, as opposed to just directly talking to decision makers. Political nature of causes, I've touched on this a bit. So there's always the private interest over the public interest. So what's in it for the political party that would push for a law or not? And then at the same time, how is the political setup of the Lebanese system, and how is it making it harder for the campaigners to really create a breakthrough in the policy-making process in Lebanon? The most impactful challenge that they spoke about is information. And although we've had the law for access to information passed in 2016, the implementation of it hasn't really started because the parliament didn't issue the implementation decrees. And based on that, it was hard for all campaigns equally to access information, whether on numbers of people impacted, or whether about the budgets that were allocated for a certain issue, or previous studies and so forth. So it was really hard for them to get this information. And we'll see in a bit how they capitalized on friends and people they knew within the institutions to give this information for them. Funding, or the lack of in certain cases. So while certain campaigns got funding because, for example, an NGO led on them, and then an NGO is a formal structure that is eligible for funding from different INGOs or donor agencies. Coalitions as such, and because they are not formal, so we don't have, the Waste Management Coalition is not formally registered as a coalition within the Lebanese government. It's a group of people. And a little number of donor agencies or INGOs would fund an informal coalition. So access to funding for some was not there. Although many activities happened based on voluntary basis, or coalition members had paid and contributed for them, it was hard for all of them to maintain volunteer motivation and retention in that sense. So people would do a research for a long period of time. At the same time, due to the situation, and as soon as they find jobs, they would leave the coalition just to be able to secure, their day-to-day needs. And then fragmentation of efforts, although again, the campaigns we studied had formed somehow coalitions to push forward their issues. Internally, they still struggled in terms of having the human, the material, and the financial resources to manage the coalition, which brings me to the previous point in terms of volunteering. So a volunteer would accept to coordinate the coalition's efforts, but at the same time, as soon as they find a job, they would leave the coalition, and then we'll go back into the dilemma of who will manage and who will coordinate and so forth. At the same time, there was fragmentation of efforts in the sense that, yes, there was a Lebanese coastal coalition. At the same time, there were efforts taking place elsewhere, not necessarily part of the coalition, for ego reasons, for fragmentation of efforts, for access to finance and funding, and so forth. So this was also another challenge. And lastly, on lessons learned, it was important for everyone to validate that building an evidence-based advocacy cases, so building our arguments on actual information and numbers and data, and having an in-depth research on the issue, put them in a better position to argue and to fight for their causes, which was important for everyone. At the same time, it created a challenge in the sense, again, for volunteers. Many people are encouraged or motivated to join a cause because for them it's advocating, it's shouting, it's protesting, it's doing action on the ground. At the same time, they were told or are told that, yes, but we need to do 1 year of research before we go into actual protests and actions. So the lengthy process that research or building an evidence-based advocacy case would take, in a way has pushed people away a bit from advocacy campaigns or efforts. At the same time, everyone acknowledged that was a very important step that they did to push forward their issues. Building partnerships and networks. Yes, we have a very highly sectarian, complex political system. At the same time, there are many key or window opener individuals within these institutions that the campaigns work with. So it's not that all parliamentarians are politically inclined towards certain issue or another, and it's not that all public administrators are politically biased and whatnot. So there are certain people within the policymaking process who are allies, and it was important to build partnerships with them. At the same time, building on the presence of experts on certain issues, so having legal experts, having environmental experts, waste management experts, etc., helped campaigners position themselves better and lead to better results. Engaging the decision makers, it was important to see that, or it was interesting to see that in certain cases, Tripoli, for example, they highlighted the fact that the earlier they engaged the decision makers in the process, the faster it was for them to actually achieve. So they engaged the Ministry of Social Affairs from the beginning. They engaged the municipality of Tripoli from the beginning, and a few private sector entities, and they explained what they're aiming at and what their plan is, and then they work together to achieve the successes that they achieve. At the same time, it was also important for everyone to understand the power dynamics of decision makers, to better understand how to approach them throughout the process. So it wasn't that one message for everyone worked. Everyone acknowledged that based on trial and error. We knew, for example, that the mayor of the municipality of Beirut does not respond to X, but they would respond to Y, so we capitalized on working with Y, for example. And lastly, in terms of commitment to achieving campaign objectives, it was important to realize that advocacy is a lengthy process and it's tiring in most cases. At the same time, maintaining a belief that a cause that they would be able to change the setting of the cause or the status of their cause was important for them to succeed. And this is why throughout the process they maintained like highlighting small gains and successes throughout the process to make sure that people are seeing, or citizens at large are seeing that they're leading some results and they're getting there bit by bit. At the same time, it was important for self-motivation, motivation of their volunteers to continue to work together. Introducing creativity and innovation was also an important lesson in the sense of using creative tools, not to reinvent the wheel. There were so many new ideas. Flash mobs came into being used as part of advocacy campaigns, engaging students, having guided tours to Beirut Public Park, having picnics in the streets to tell people that green spaces are rare, we don't have them, so let's advocate for the reopening of Hajj Beirut, and so forth. At the same time, having stories, having people share their intimate or personal stories to highlight the importance of the issue. Again, the issue of the women's nationality, the issue of the families of the disappeared, to be able to maintain the engagement of people as such, and making the issue a national issue rather than the issue of a group of people. Okay, we're good? Yeah? Can you hear me?
I think we're good.
Yes, yes.
I'm like, have I been speaking on my own?
No, we're here.
All right. Okay, so the last section will focus on recommendations. So an analysis of the 5 cases and the general scene of advocacy in the country. Again, keeping in mind that we looked at 2013 and between 2013 and 2018. At the same time, we're here, we're living here, we know how things are going. So the recommendations do not necessarily only bind us to the period of 2013, 2018, or 20, or 19, or 20. The recommendations are still valid, and probably more so today than ever, as we're living this intense situation. So the way we divided the recommendations is for 3 recommendations for civil society organizations, and then recommendations for policymakers, and recommendations for donor agencies. So for civil society organizations, we have 4 main recommendations. 1, to maintain relevance to the socioeconomic well-being, especially as we go through this intense economic crisis. We've never lived something like this before. So maintaining a relevance to the socioeconomic well-being is important for people to join efforts and for people to really see the impact of, I don't know, waste management on the socioeconomic well-being, the importance of nationality issues or public parks or legal marriage age, whatever, to the socioeconomic well-being. So how is it impacting that? Diversifying skills and capacities within the campaign team, so to have different resources resources to join in, different skills, leveraging resources and joining efforts. So if one entity has expertise in digital marketing and social media, then that's great. Let's join efforts with someone else who has more experience in organizing protests and flash mobs and whatnot. Capitalizing on media interest is the fourth recommendation, and we'll see in a bit how we cover that. So mainly, in terms of again, building the evidence-based, having legal expertise, policy experts with them on board is important. In terms of recommendations for policymakers, building trust with community members is one important recommendations that we have for them. In the sense that it's always the case, or not to generalize, but 90% of the cases, it's that civil society organizations going to policymakers with recommendations. It's important for policymakers to also know that there are allies out there, there are experts out there on certain topics, so it's important to engage them. Have better communications with community members, both at the local and the national level, in terms of sharing information, gathering input, taking opinions of the people on certain issues, and so forth. And then having or practicing participatory governance in the sense of engaging regularly with interest groups, experts groups on what's going on and certain discussions that they're having. Take action on adopted policies. So again, the access to information law is a very good example on that. I remember because I was on the campaign advocating for the access for information, and we worked for 7 years, and then we have the law, but then all efforts to advocate died the moment that the law was issued. And I think an important lesson learned for civil society is that no, it doesn't end there. So advocacy work does not end when the law is adopted or a policy is changed. It actually should continue towards the implementation and making sure that the implementation is in line with what the law suggests. So, and the same goes to the banning smoking in public spaces, the same goes to combating corruption and so forth. So actually follow on. So take action on adopted policies. Sharing information on the progress or hindrances of issues and laws. So why is the access to information law not being enacted? So what's hindering this? Is it a political party? Is it a political dynamic? Is it the lack of expertise? So why isn't it happening? And then enhancing, yes.
Sorry, this is Caitlin. I'm wondering, just so we can save time for questions, could we maybe go to the summary slide of the recommendations so people can see them? And then maybe we can start to have a conversation. Does that work?
Definitely.
Sorry, I'm just being mindful of the time. And I'm assuming there are questions.
Yeah, so just covering quickly the last one for donors. So enhancing CSO's capacity in advocacy. We know that there has been several training programs at the same time. New generations within organizations are being active, and new organizations are coming into the scene or being created in the scene. So it's important to continue these efforts, strengthening policy analysis and recommendations. As much as possible, try to foster the engagement between policymakers and advocates, and for example, so having long-lasting programs that are available probably online for people who want to go and find these resources, and then program around current needs, and also linking them to the socioeconomic well-being. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak this much, but it seemed I did. I'm sorry for that.
That's okay.
So any questions, comments, feedback, please share them. At the same time, I'd like us to think of how do you think within the different programs we can use these case studies in the future. So these case studies will be published on Beyond Group's website. Probably next week they should be online. So also, how do you think we can capitalize on them?
Thank you, Marwa. I'll start off with a question. This is Caitlin. I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about, you talked about how important it is to build trust and having trust in civil society. And I was wondering if you can talk about how that has changed or been fractured or not over the past year and a half in Lebanon and the challenges the country has faced. I know there's distrust in the government, but I'm wondering how people are viewing civil society as a voice for advocacy to affect the change that they want to see.
Sure. Thank you, Caitlin, for that. There's no doubt that, again, these times we're living are like no other. At the same time, the protests that started in 2015 and probably before in 2011 with the calls for changing the system, and then the different dynamics that come in play. Today, there is definitely more trust in civil society organizations. One, as entities filling gaps that the government is not being able to fill. At the same time, there are so many new faces, not necessarily members of organizations as such, so in terms of like formal organizations, but there are members of the community who are well known now to the general public as potential alternative, quote unquote, individuals to take lead on certain policies and aspects. And there are so many experts who has been on TV and in the streets and in like discussion circles talking about certain issues that the people at large are trusting that there are these capacities in the country and we can capitalize on to actually reach better policies. At the same time, there continues to be, which is the case, I assume, in all countries, there continues to be some definitely critical aspects or voices towards civil society organizations as those implementing donor agendas or those that are, the elite of the society. This is why it's important, while working on advocacy issues, to make sure that it's grassroots, it's engaging as many people as possible, making the issue reach to as many people as possible before going online and on TV and discussing the high technicalities of the issue, just making it a people's nationwide issue before getting it into the higher levels, probably.
Thank you. We have some questions in the chat. I don't know, Lan, I can read them out or feel free to chime in.
I'm happy to ask, Caitlin. I'll just read what I wrote in the chat. Well, thank you so much for the great presentation, Marwa. I appreciate your time. It's really interesting. I actually have 3 questions. I've posted 2 of them in the chat. You mentioned earlier the importance of representing voices outside of Beirut, so representing voices in rural and maybe semi-urban areas. And I was wondering if you can give us a few examples of how some of the campaigns did that. Should I present all my questions, or would you like to take them one at a time?
Okay, now I can see them in the chat. So yeah, I'll answer the rural versus urban and engaging different campaigns throughout. So it was important for all the campaigns, 4 campaigns except for the local one in Tripoli, to engage with rural areas, engaging different localities to make it a national issue. So again, the Hirsch Beirut is a Hirsch Beirut. It's a park in Beirut. At the same time, it's not only an issue about the Beirut Public Park. It's not only about these neighborhoods surrounding the park to be able to access it. It's an issue, making it an issue of public green spaces. And this is how Nahnu and others engaged people in South and people in the Bekaa and elsewhere. So shifting from the central Beirut level to the regions. The Nationality campaign, same thing. It's not about the few women in Beirut who have access to meet parliamentarians and be on TV. It's an issue of all women in the country who are married not only to Palestinians, who are married to French, to Americans, to everyone. And it's their issue. So this is how they brought all these people together to make their voices heard more. There are also issues that started at the local level and then impacted national level. And this is, for example, the LPHU, the Lebanese Physically Handicapped Union. This is how they started. They started working together from different regions. So they have little hubs and little offices in all the regions. They brought together all the physically handicapped people to advocate for Law 220, for example. The anti-smoking campaign or banning smoking in public spaces is another example. Climate change also. I remember there was a campaign around climate change in 2009. It started in the regions and then shifted to the center. So I go to your second question on utilizing creative and innovative approaches. Okay, so in terms about how they identified approaches, I think since 2011 and with the Arab Spring, I think we've seen so much capitalization on social media, on videos, on short animations, on capitalizing on tools that we have, WhatsApp. So in villages, like every village has different WhatsApp groups for people in the villages to communicate together. So they capitalized on these tools to basically change the way we used to do advocacy. I remember the way we worked on access to information law was the traditional way. Yeah, we do press release, we sign petitions, and then we argue with parliamentarians and we protest. But now advocacy is happening differently. It's happening on social media. It's happening on Twitter. It was interesting to see that policymakers answer Twitter more than they answer their emails, for example, because they don't necessarily access their emails, but Twitter is a public image, yeah, so they do capitalize on that. So this is how they started incorporating or identifying creative approaches. You had a third question, Leanne?
Actually,
yes.
this is Caitlin. I was wondering if you could share a few more details about how the voices were included into the campaigns. Yeah, just how they went about that.
Okay, so it was different levels, having videos and sharing videos highlighting the stories of different, for example, different women on the Nationality campaign, having videos bringing together all the families of the disappeared, of the people who were disappeared and kidnapped during the war, come together, bringing them together to in front of the Council of Ministers and camping there with pictures of their sons and daughters and husbands who were kidnapped, also engage them in the process and increase their ownership of the process and so forth. So mainly highlighting personal stories throughout the process. So Dalia, current economic situation affecting any possible advocacy initiatives in terms of trust and engagement. So engagement, trust and engagement of local communities, I feel personally that now like communities are looking for an alternative. Whatever that alternative is, now is the time to present it. And if I look back to the October 17 revolution, and if I reflect on the streets in Tripoli and the different tents that were set in Tripoli and the conversations and arguments, discussion sessions that were taking place, I feel these were a very good example of showing how really local communities do want are thirsty for engagement and trust and taking a role in things, irrespective of their economic and social background. There was a room for everyone to participate, whether it was through a rap song, whether it was through a poem that they were saying, or whether it was through a discussion session that they were participating in. So I feel today, yes, the economic situation is horrible, impacting everyone. And people probably wouldn't choose to waste time on discussion sessions. At the same time, with the current situation, there's little that is being done at the official political national level. So we might as well capitalize to see as much as possible how to engage local community.
Well, I'm not sure if you're seeing questions come through the chat.
Yes. So Teresa, in terms of engaging private sector, again, the more political the issue is, the less likely that the private sector will be engaged in, for obvious reasons, profit gains, being tagged politically and whatnot. In the case of Movement is Life in Tripoli, it was purely a human rights approached advocacy approach that basically told the private sector, this is the law. It states that 3% of the law of job vacancies in the private sector should go to physically handicapped. Here's a CV of a highly capable person, and we demand that you apply the law. And this again, it's a purely human rights aspect or approach to advocacy, so they were more engaged. In other events where private sector was engaged but would not necessarily declare their engagement is, for example, they would cover the cost fees of printing pamphlets or having billboards for free so that campaigns could share their messages and so forth. So the more political the issue is, the less likely that the private sector will be engaged. At the same time, it's about how the issue is presented to the private sector that would actually make the difference.
I'm just curious, specifically when we talk about like the planning team for these types of campaigns, to what extent did they include people who, you know, are not maybe civil society or advocacy experts, are experts in their different professional fields, or even citizens or young people? And especially I'm thinking now because, you know, since October 2019, but even before, we've seen a lot more people mobilized to become involved in initiatives and campaigns who wouldn't have prior to that. So I wanted to see if you have seen that change and the value of that happening.
Yeah. Thank you, Rindala, for this comment. I fully agree, 100%. Again, reflecting back the way we used to do advocacy, 2005, 2006 till 2009, whenever, it was the civil society organization or the campaign or the coalition. So I remember for the Lebanese within the group, the Khalas campaign or the UA or whatever, it was these people. Yeah, we know each other. We go to the street, hi, kif kun, we greet each other like it's been a long time, we haven't seen you. Now it's different. We go to the streets and we go to meetings and we go to planning meetings and we see new faces. And these new faces are basically community members who are not part of any organization. So they're not part of an NGO or a coalition, but they are an expert in waste management, or they are an expert in economic development, or they're a psychologist who wants to provide their technical expertise in terms of behavioral changes and reaching people, etc. So I fully agree that now the times have changed in terms of how we're structuring action. And this is where sometimes we hear that yes, civil society organizations, like they have their agendas, but we're here because we believe in the cause. And it becomes a competition between non-structured and structured attempts or initiatives. So I fully agree that now it's a time to really engage people from different walks of life and different expertise, whether they are part of NGOs or not. It might be better also in the sense of lessening or lowering the impact of competition between NGOs in that sense. So who leads on an issue and who appears more on media and so forth. And I think this has allowed certain coalitions, again, the Lebanese Coastal Coalition or the Waste Management Coalition, to actually reach its somehow its objectives, in the sense that there are a group of experts working together, backed by civil society organizations who have the volunteers, who have the know-how in terms of advocating and structuring a plan and a campaign, but not necessarily the technical expertise on the topic.
We are about at time. I'm not sure if there's any final quick questions.
Marwa, you mentioned that the evidence gathering phase hindered, and I'm not using the words you used, but what I interpreted from what you said, it hindered the momentum of some of the campaigns. I'm wondering, based on this experience, what would you say campaigns in Lebanon should do better to ensure the campaigns are evidence informed without hindering the momentum of the campaign? So sort of trying to balance both.
Reading these case studies, building on the lessons learned. No, really, like a very, very important lesson from all these efforts is that research takes time, because we seek information that we don't know exists, or we know that exists but we can't get. Again, because of all the hidden doors and caves we go into to basically find some data. So I think capitalizing on all these efforts and having, for example, a shared research task force for any campaign that will be established in the country. They know that there is a task force, just like how we have legal clinics, for example. So just like we have legal clinics for certain aspects, we have information clinics or research desks and clinics for campaigns. So there is a set of experts who form a research task force for any campaign that they need research or information on whatever the topic is, they know that they can go to these expert or this group of researchers, university professors, students, whatever, who are available to help them build their file. And this will allow campaigners to focus probably on other aspects of the campaign rather than just then spending, like everyone spending their time searching for a piece of information here and there. And I think also capitalizing on the fact that we know that access to information in Lebanon is extremely hard, but we also know that there are key people or individuals within institutions that are willing to help, and this is off record, and that they can give us the information that we need if we know how to engage them. And this is where we always capitalize on the key people aspect of within campaigns. So find your key people, who are your allies within the institution, within the parliament, within the municipality, who are willing to make things a little easier in terms of gaining information. However, I really think that having a task force, a national task force that supports advocacy campaigns in their research would help these campaigns extremely well to be able to position themselves, get themselves the right arguments based on evidence to be able to do that.
Marwa, thank you very much for this session. It was really super informative. Thanks a lot for the great work.
Thank you, Dalia. Happy to hear.
Thank you, Marwa. It was great working with you all over this, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Diana, Francis, Caitlin, Anna, for all your support. It was a pleasant journey.
Sorry, just to comment on one thing, because how to use this information in the future. And I mean, I think obviously, you know, we want to, this will be posted on Beyond site, and to disseminate this widely, especially for the various programs out there that are supporting the capacity building of civil society, of individuals and activists, and you know, how to take forward these lessons as people continue to advocate for rights in Lebanon, recognizing too some of the key points that Marwa has raised, also that emerged from the research. And you know, we know things are hard and they're getting harder, yet change takes time, and there is change that has happened, and this is where also we need to inspire people with the efforts of others as well. So again, thank you to Marwa and the Beyond team. You guys were great, and again, when we look back also at the original 40 or 50 cases, I forget, that you did in the mapping, you know, there is this richness in Lebanon, and yes, not everything comes easy, and we know it's a long struggle, but there's definitely lessons that can be applied as we go forward.
Great, thank you all so much for joining. And thanks to Beyond Group, Francis, Diana, MSI, USAID for your support, and we hope everyone has a lovely day and evening.